Hello and welcome to Matcha Mornings, part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network. I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith, and I'm excited to dive deep on topics around holistic health, the power of food, hormone health, how the practices of yoga can impact our health and well-being, and much more. So grab your cup of tea, settle in, and let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Matcha Mornings podcast. I'm Amanda, and I am so glad that you've decided to join me for today's episode of the show. Today on the podcast, I am very excited to be joined by Dr. Sara Thyr. Dr. Sara Thyr is a naturopathic doctor from Willowbend Natural Medicine based out of California. And on this episode of the podcast, we talk about what naturopathic medicine is, how a naturopathic doctor can help, and we talk about some of the main struggles that people have that they come to Dr. Sara Thyr for. So we talk about digestion, the importance of digestion, how to know when your digestion's off, and we also talk about hormone balancing. And one of the reasons that I am so excited for this episode is because naturopathic medicine has really helped me with my digestion, my hormone balancing, and honestly, I would not be where I am today without my naturopath. So if you are interested in natural health and wellness and healing naturally, you will love this episode and everything that Dr. Sara Thyr has to share. So without further ado, here she is. Enjoy the episode. Dr. Sara Thyr, welcome to the show today. I'm super excited to have you here with me.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Yeah, I am so excited for this conversation and everything we're going to chat about today. And I want to dive in by just talking a little bit about your health and wellness journey. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey with health and wellness and kind of what inspired you, down the path that you're on now?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a little circuitous for sure. When I went to college, I went to a liberal arts school in Kansas, and I fell in love with science. I really fell in love with biology. And so I became a biology major. Hadn't really been into that in high school or anything, became a biology major. And at that time felt like the options for that major were either medicine or teaching. At that time, I didn't really want to do teaching and ended up not going to medical school for a variety of reasons. So I ended up with a job with a pharmaceutical company. So that lasted for a little while, and I think it was a really good experience for me, but ultimately not really where my heart was. And in the meantime, I had started in my own life doing things more naturally and looking to natural treatments for things and eating organically. And I read an article from the health food store about treating childhood ear infections without antibiotics. And it was all about really supporting the system of the child and removing obstacles to getting better. And I just really struck home with me. And I started researching the writer, and they had been from this school up in Seattle called Bastyr University. And I ended up just really, like one of those moments where the clouds part and the sun shines. And I was like, oh yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do. And so I ended up that next year going up to Seattle and going to the Naturopathic Medical School up there.
Wow, that's incredible to hear and such an inspiring journey. And I'm curious for people listening, what exactly was naturopathic school like and what is it to be a naturopathic doctor?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The naturopathic schools are really amazing. There's a number of them now in the United States that are accredited, which means they go through the process of, I'm not a school administrator, so I'm not going to be the best person to really explain that well, but accreditation really sort of says that you're teaching your students the right things and or holding students to a certain standard. And so the Bastyr University where I went really is very focused on science. And the first couple of years, like conventional medical school, are all about anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, all of those things that you would expect to learn at a medical school. And then the last couple of years, rather than learning about surgery and pharmaceuticals, we learn a lot more about trying to find underlying causes of illness and using herbs and nutritional therapies to treat things, and some different types of lab testing that I think are pretty uncommon in most people's conventional worlds, but I tend to use a lot of those kinds of labs in my practice because I really feel like there's definitely, the green version of a lot of things to treat headaches or cuts or sleep or things like that. There's herbs and there's supplements that can treat those things. But what I'm more passionate about and what I think is much more effective is to find the underlying causes of things. So that leads me down the road of a lot of different types of lab testing to see if we can't find underlying causes of whatever people come in for. And I find that that is one of the things that brings people in, sometimes not so much that they're really passionate about doing things naturopathically, but that they haven't really been helped by conventional medicine. And so the way that I work can often be a little bit more helpful in that sense of seeing if we can get to the underlying causes. We still might want to use some herbs. We still might want to do some other treatments for them, but hopefully we get to the bottom, the root of it. And then they, our bodies are designed to be well. They're designed to be whole. They're really quite miraculous when you think about it. I think that's why I fell in love with biology, because it's like, holy cow, this is all just such a miracle, the way things work without us even thinking about it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. It's, and I love just hearing about kind of that philosophy and practice of naturopathic medicine. And for me, that was very much my experience when I worked with a naturopathic doctor, is that, it wasn't just about like a Band-Aid solution. It was like, okay, you have something going on. Let's really figure out what that is and then go from there. So yeah, exactly. And so I'm curious, like, what are some of the most common things that you help clients or patients with?
So I would say weird things that conventional medicine hasn't treated yet. So that might be a skin condition or a digestive situation or fatigue or things like that. Really common in my practice, I think, are things that are really common in the world. So I see a lot of people for hormonal imbalances. I see a lot of people for digestive issues. I know you were saying that that was one of your things that had started you on this path. And I think that that's really, really common. And with digestive issues in particular, if we don't get to the underlying cause, like there's so many medications out there that are used, but really what's helpful is to figure out why it's happening. I also see people for dementia. That's one of my more passionate projects these days. But it's definitely really a variety of things in my practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love hearing that. And yeah, for sure. Just like you said, like my journey really started with seeing a naturopathic doctor for digestion. And then, she's been able to help me with so much other stuff now, and including a lot of
Right.
hormonal imbalances. And that's been so, so helpful for me, like in ways that I can't even like begin to express. It's just, I'm so grateful to be able to have that. And I'm curious because digestion seems to be a really, really common, struggle that a lot of people have. What is, I guess, the role of digestion in our bodies and our lives? And like, how can we start looking at our digestion from a more holistic viewpoint?
Yeah, Amanda, that's so important. I mean, it's a really great question because from my perspective, the digestion is like the root of your health. That's where it all starts. So if that's not functioning properly, then nothing is going to be good. If that's not working well or there's problems there's a ripple effect that goes out from there. So it's one of the things I think that even when people don't come in talking about that, I always ask them. I always ask my patients. And it's funny when you're dealing with a 12-year-old boy or someone like that, and you have to ask them about their poop because they really do not want to talk about it. But I think it's important exposure for people to just really realize that is just super important. Like if that's not good, then we need to work on that. Or it also is such a clue for me in terms of what needs to happen. So that might be from people eating too much processed food or having been on a lot of different antibiotics that can cause these long-term digestive problems or even food allergies or food sensitivities. There's a lot of things that can end up causing leaky gut, or intestinal permeability is the more medical term for that, or lack of good probiotics in their system. There's so many things that we can address.
Yeah, for sure. There's a ton of stuff there. And I think it is really interesting because like our digestive system kind of sits in like the center of our body, and then our limbs go out from there. And there's so much different like science and research coming out about like the gut mind connection, gut body connection. And I just feel like when I look back on my journey, I recognize, how much I was struggling with my digestion for so long. And I just didn't think about like, I don't want to talk about my poop to people, and I'm not going to share that with my friends or my mom and stuff like that. So it's like, you just don't talk about that. And you don't think about, I guess, having stomach aches as being something that is your body signaling to you like something's not right here. Or at least I didn't, especially as like, a late teenager and in my early 20s. And now I look back on that and I'm like, for so long, my body was telling me what you're doing isn't working. And I just wasn't listening. I just thought it was normal.
That's a really great point. A lot of people, because it's common for them and it isn't talked about in families, do just think it's normal, that's just how it is. So they don't even think that that's something that they could fix if they would go to talk to somebody. They just think that that's just how their body works. And, it's unfortunate that people don't talk about poop more often. There's one takeaway from this podcast: talk about your poop.
Yeah, talk about somebody who's willing to listen, I guess, because you got to find somebody who's down to talk about poop too.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Probably a good call.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when it comes to, I guess for people listening, like when it comes to our digestion, like what are some of the signs that we can start listening to and tuning into that's like, okay, my body's telling me that my digestion's not good? Like what should we specifically be looking for?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And like you mentioned, the stomach aches you thought were just sort of normal. You shouldn't be in pain. We shouldn't be in pain, or, you shouldn't really even know that your digestion's working. It should be sort of seamless. I think that that's one of the first things, is if you're uncomfortable. And one of the problems with like figuring that out, I think this is one of the other reasons people get kind of stymied by this, is that we've so rarely eat one thing. At any given meal, you're consuming 10 to 12 different things, different types of things. You might have a salad, you might have a soup, you might have a sandwich, even just the bread has 3 or 4 things in it. So you really, it takes a lot to sort of parse that out when things aren't working, to sort of figure out if there's certain things that you're eating that aren't helping, because we're all such creatures of habit too, that changing that is a little bit daunting for some people. So I think that just feeling good is one really important thing. As we mentioned before, paying attention to how your bowel movements are, being aware if you should be having at least one bowel movement a day. And if that's not happening, or if there's difficulty in passing them, or loose stools, so anything that's kind of wrong with that nice rhythm of digestion. And also, a lot of people that come to me are suffering from bloating. And that's definitely a sign that something's wrong. Another thing that I think a lot of people just feel like is normal for them, but the sign that something's not working right, or your body's having a difficult time digesting something, or excess gas is being created by something you're consuming that you can't quite break down. So any of those things. Reflux, a lot of people suffer from acid reflux or heartburn, which in my practice, I would say probably 25% of the time is actually a hiatal hernia, not like acid coming up from the stomach, but it feels like that. So there's just a lot of things we can address.
Yeah, absolutely. Tons of stuff to kind of be looking for and paying attention to. And then what's kind of the first step in terms of starting to heal that and heal our digestion? Is there any kind of, general practices that you do with clients?
I tend to do a decent amount of testing because I like to know if people have food allergies. So I'd say that's a pretty common one for me. I also will sometimes test people for SIBO, or small intestine bacterial overgrowth, if that seems likely. I use a lot of probiotics. Really good probiotics, I think, are super important for gut healing. So, depending on what testing might show, we might do a food elimination diet or an anti-inflammatory diet, or perhaps work on just using digestive enzymes. Nature has given us so many great things that are also wonderfully calming for the digestive tract. So I even have people use things that they have at home. Catnip is great for the digestion, or bitters, dandelion greens from your front yard. And there's a lot of things that we can have just easily to help our digestion.
Yeah, amazing. I have memories as a child, like drinking peppermint tea on the lying on the ground. I was lactose intolerant, but we didn't know for a
Mm-hmm.
while. I mean, I grew up in the 90s, right? So it was like a little bit slower to get that stuff tested. And I think it was common that people were lactose intolerant, but it just wasn't as prevalent now. Like, I think maybe a mother with a small child experiencing that type of digestion would have had more resources and access to that type of thing. But my mom just had no idea what was going on. But she knew that peppermint was really soothing. So anytime I had a stomach ache, I remember just lying on the ground and she would get me to sip peppermint tea while rubbing my belly and try and soothe it. So,
Brilliant.
mhm.
Absolutely brilliant. I think back then too, it was harder to find replacements, like now you can get any type of beverage, oat milk or almond milk or coconut milk. I don't think we're supposed to call them milk now. I think that passed, but you know what I mean? Like back then, and when I was growing up too, you really didn't have, it wasn't even really discussed and certainly wasn't easily accessed.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I remember as a kid, and it was very much put out there by, I'm Canadian, like through the Canadian government. It was like your kids need to have like a cup of milk a day. It's so key for their growth, their bones, their calcium, etc. And so my parents were very much like, you need to be drinking this milk. And I just remember sitting at the dinner table being like, I don't want to drink it. It's gross. It makes me feel sick. And my mom thought I was kind of just like making it up that I felt sick, and because I didn't want to drink the milk. And after we found
Right.
out I was lactose intolerant, she bought me some like lactose free milks and some forms of dairy milks that they had in like the early 90s. And it was so bad. It was so bad. Like, we are so lucky now. I mean, I feel like I can go to any coffee shop around the world because they still don't really consume
Mm-hmm.
cow's milk and dairy products. And I can get oat milk. I can get almond milk or beverage, if we're supposed to call them that, coconut, soy. There's so many options and they're so good. I feel like they're actually better than cow's milk most of the time.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I haven't had cow's milk in, you know, decades for sure. But yeah, I remember when I first stopped doing dairy products, when I realized I was lactose intolerant, rice milk was kind of the only alternative. It's pretty especially back then, it's pretty like, meh, I just won't bother drinking milk beverage because
Yeah,
it's not
personally, I
fun.
feel like, yeah, rice milk is like pretty mediocre for me now. So I feel like, back then it
Mm-hmm.
was definitely not a great option. But yeah, I definitely remember like trying the different lactose free and non dairy options. And then I was like, I just don't want to drink this. Like, let me just take a calcium pill or something like that because this is just so gross. So I'm really grateful that, we've been able to develop a little bit in that way. And I think also just with all the information coming out now, it's amazing that, parents have more access to that stuff, adults have more access to this information. And I think it becomes a little bit easier to navigate when you have digestion issues, just with all the access we have to research and the internet and stuff like that.
Exactly.
And so, one of the things you mentioned that I'm curious about is SIBO. I've heard about SIBO before, and it seems like it's like a pretty common thing that a lot of people are experiencing at this point in time. What is SIBO, and what are kind of the symptoms of SIBO?
Yeah. SIBO stands for small intestine bacterial overgrowth. So it's not really an infection, but it's an overgrowth of what is the normal flora to an extent that it's causing some symptoms and usually related to what people are eating. So the most common things that I see in my practice with people with SIBO are symptoms of upper abdominal bloating, particularly worse after meals, and also constipation. So when you do the SIBO testing, they can show you which gas is mostly produced. And So you can sort of assess whether that's causing their constipation or something like that.
Okay, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I have I've heard about it a bunch, but just didn't know too much about it. And I think it's definitely, interesting to know the different types of things that could be happening. Switching gears a little bit, in my own journey, I originally went to a naturopathic doctor for my digestion. And, I figured that's kind of all I need. Things are going to be fine. But as I went through my journey, I kept up the changes I made in my diet. But then as I continued down my own holistic path, I ended up going off of hormonal birth control. And I ended up not getting my period naturally for 2 years. And I really struggled working with my doctor because he was very much like, well, it seemed like birth control was working fine. Why don't you just go back on that till you want to have kids? And
Mm-hmm.
I was 23 at the time, and I, wasn't at the point that I wanted to have kids in my life. I still don't have kids, and I'm 31 now. And I just had this sense of like, that's not right for me. And I just kind of trusted that. And thankfully I had this naturopathic doctor who'd like healed my digestion essentially. And so I went to her and she worked a lot with me on, just getting my body to function how it's designed to function. Cause I'd been on birth control since I was 15. I got my period at 13 and it had come super irregularly. And then I went on birth control to regulate it. And it felt like, looking back on it, that my body never got the chance to kind of like figure out its own system before I just
Mm-hmm.
smacked it with fake hormones. And then it took so
Mm-hmm.
long to kind of regulate after. So I'd love to hear kind of the support that you do around hormones and just what you kind of see with hormonal imbalances and that type of thing.
Yeah, it's really common. So I really appreciate that question because I so feel for these women. And I wish that everyone could see a naturopath when they're like 12, 15, 22. There's all these phases that we go through with our bodies, that it would be so nice to have things straightened out without being put on. Because you're right, like what you saw with you is like coming off the birth control wasn't, it takes a long time for a lot of women to get things regulated and to feel better. So it's really nice if we can start on that earlier. And what I see in my practice is a lot of women, I think it depends on what it is. Like if people are having skin problems, they're much more likely to come in, even more than pain problems, like if it's showing on your face, then we're willing to put in some effort. But so I do see a lot of women with acne, and often it's hormonal. So then when we start talking about their skin, then we learn that they've also got, you know, maybe really long periods, heavy periods, long cycles where they're having a 40-day cycle. So there's a lot of things that maybe that isn't the first symptom, because just like with digestion, a lot of women just think that it's normal. They don't necessarily talk to people about it. And so when I have women come into my practice, I really get a very thorough history about all of the different aspects of their, not just their hormones, but certainly all of that, their digestion and what they're eating. And all of that really does play a big role. And then, with hormones, I don't do as much testing because I feel like people's history really gives us a pretty good clue as to what's happening. And there's some things that we can try. So if somebody's got acne and eczema and headaches and digestive issues, then yeah, let's really focus on your food, because a lot of times cleaning up your diet surprisingly helps your hormones and your headaches too, So that's kind of where I start. I love to do liver detoxification with people for hormonal balance. I like liver detoxification for many, many things, but I really like it for hormonal balance problems because our liver is such an integral part of helping our hormones to clear out through our body and keep things running normally. So doing a liver cleanse can be super beneficial to hormonal problems, because in that process, we're also changing the way we're eating. So it's kind of a twofold approach to that.
Hey everyone, we're taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about Muse. Muse tracks your brain during meditation to give you real-time feedback on your meditation, guiding you into the zone and solving the major problem that most of us have when starting a meditation practice. Muse lets you know when you're doing it right. Your Muse headband basically acts like your personal assistant. While you meditate, Muse measures whether your mind is calm or active and translates that data into sounds. When you're calm, you'll hear peaceful sounds, and when your mind wanders, the sounds will intensify, guiding you back to a calm state. So if you're like me, where you have a really solid meditation practice and you love to do it every day or every couple of days, but sometimes you just find that you really can't get in the rhythm because your mind is so busy, Muse might be for you. The best part about this is that I have a 15% discount off just for listeners of Matcha Mornings. So head on over to bit.ly/Matcha Mornings Muse to get your discount. All right, back to the episode. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because as I've kind of, just dove down, I guess, the rabbit hole of learning more and more about hormones and how to balance hormones, learning more about the liver was definitely something that was a really key part of that. And it's so interesting because the liver is a very, very fascinating and very, very important organ, yet it's something that I knew virtually nothing about until a couple of years ago when I started reading about it and learning what it did for my body and understanding how it was impacting my cycle every month. And I'd be curious to know what the liver cleanses that you do with patients are like for balancing hormones.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I love talking about it because I'm really passionate about liver cleanses. So I do group cleanses in my practice a couple times a year. And the things that I normally do, and it will depend a little bit if I have a patient in my practice, we might get things really specific for them. But normally what we're going to do is cut out caffeine, sugar, alcohol, refined carbohydrates, any processed food. So we definitely do a lot of nutrition changes. We really up their hydration. So what people are consuming during the cleanse is water, detox tea, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean organic proteins, nuts and seeds, things like that. So really very much a basic whole foods diet. It doesn't have to be vegetarian. I do think that protein is really important for your liver to function properly, but we usually ask that people not have red meat because it's higher in arachidonic acid, which is it's just part of what the meat has in it that can cause more inflammation. So one of the things that we're trying to accomplish with this overall throughout the body is decreasing inflammation. And that most people do express that they feel better in that sense, like less joint pain and things like that. So, but inflammation impacts your hormones too. It impacts your digestion, it impacts your heart, it impacts your brain. So really decreasing that inflammation with diet is important. And then we also use some supplements. I usually vary this a little bit. I'm always looking at what's out there to see what I feel like is the most beneficial. But currently we use a packaged product that includes a protein powder that's a vegetarian-based protein that also has a bunch of nutrients in it. And that product also comes with a multivitamin type of capsule, and then also a capsule that has a lot of liver support herbs in it. So we do those things. I always have people do a type of glutathione. I don't know if you're familiar with glutathione, but glutathione is one of the very, very important antioxidant detox enzymes that your liver produces. And a lot of us are low in that. And so we really crank up people's glutathione when we're doing this cleanse. And then also, I love having people on a really good fiber blend, because one of the things about detoxification, I don't ever do cathartic detoxes where people are, running to the bathroom all the time. But I do think that a really nice fiber blend can really help with that elimination process. So that elimination just being nice, healthy bowel movements that are easy to pass and light and fluffy. So a nice fiber blend can be helpful for that. And then I usually try to educate them about all of the toxins in our world. So there's so many chemicals that we're exposed to. And I think especially for my women clients, looking at things like just what we're putting on our skin and in our hair. And there's so many chemicals in all of that stuff. So I really try to educate people as we're going through this process too, of ways that you can do things, cleaning products that are more natural, lipsticks that don't, have so many toxins in them. So a lot of people can benefit from that just in terms of lowering your toxin exposure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because that was one of the things when I actually read Woman Code by Elisa Vitti. I guess it was like three years ago. And it was, just very basic information, but it was so like game changing or mind blowing for me because it was the stuff that I kind of feel like I knew, but I wasn't really taking seriously or implementing. And one of the things was looking at the toxins in your environment and looking at like what you're putting on your skin and what makeup you're using, what you're using for products. And I was already pretty conscious about ingredients and products and trying to use more natural products, but that was very much like, okay, so I've been having these hormonal issues for 5 years now, and it's slowly getting better, but there's still so much that I could be doing to support my body. And I feel like, for me, kind of clearing out just some of those excess old products that had fragrance and chemicals in them. And, I just was like, I'm done with them. Like, I'm just going to get rid of them. And that's been really, really helpful for me in my own personal journey for sure.
Yeah, it's so important. I'm so glad to hear you say that because I feel like so many people, like people wear fragrance and those are endocrine disruptors. Like that's not only going to affect your reproductive system, but that's going to affect your baby's reproductive system. Like that affects your grandkids. So there's a lot of those chemicals on the market and that whole industry, the whole skincare, makeup, fragrance industry is so unregulated. And I'm not like somebody that's for huge regulation, but I do think people should be educated about what is in that stuff. And we, of course, are absorbing things through our skin, like that's a very permeable membrane. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think that some people don't realize like it is an organ and it functions in like bringing things into our body and releasing things. I mean, sweating is a way of excreting, and yeah, it's so important what we put on our skin. And I think that we know, or a lot of people know, and I'm assuming a lot of people listening to this podcast know that what we put in our bodies is so important, but it's also what we put on our bodies, like the air that we're breathing in, what we're cleaning our sheets with. Like we sleep on our sheets and we wear clothes all day. There's so many things to consider with that. And sometimes it can feel overwhelming because it's hard to really be, I guess, quote unquote, like perfect with it. But I always just think about like, if I can make a choice that's better than another choice, that's helping me in my hormonal imbalances and
Yeah,
helping me
I
get back to a
agree.
place of
You don't have to
homeostasis.
be perfect all at once. You're so
Hmm.
right about that. And I find that when I'm doing these detox workshops, you start to see people's eyes glaze over. And you're really right. You don't have to be perfect. Just the next time you're going to buy laundry soap, get a cleaner one. The next time, pull out your air fresheners that are in your house and just put in a diffuser with some essential oils if you want to have a fragrance, or open the windows and let in some fresh air. It's interesting when we look at toxins in the home, they've found that indoor air quality is far worse than outdoor air quality. So there's a lot of things in our home, and it can be super overwhelming in the beginning, but then you just like, now this is your laundry soap. So the next thing you tackle is your lotion that you're putting on your body. And maybe the next time you need to buy makeup, you go with something that's a little bit less, and I think it's also overwhelming when you start reading labels because nobody understands the names of all those chemicals. So it really can be tough to start with, but there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of great help out there to get something that's a little cleaner and better for you.
Yeah, 100% for sure. There's an app that has helped me. I think it's called Think Dirty, and it's got like a lot of kind of, common brands, and it actually kind of gives them, there's like red, yellow, and green. And obviously green is like these things are good. And then the yellow is like will tell you what the ingredient is and maybe why it's not great and what it can do. And then the red is like, okay, this is processed, this is a chemical, we really shouldn't be consuming this. And I found that really helpful to kind of start understanding because you're totally right. Like I found shampoo was actually quite tough because even some of the organic brands had, these lists of ingredients. And I was like, I don't know what this is. Like, I cannot pronounce this word. I don't know if this is good for me. I don't know if this is bad for me. I have no idea what this is. Like, I couldn't identify this for the life of me. And so I don't know that the app is perfect, but I felt like it helped me a little bit with decision making and just kind of starting to be like, oh, okay, this is just a fancy word for water or something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some very great apps out there. I like Think Dirty a lot. The Environmental Working Group has one called Skin Deep. And a lot of them you can scan the barcode when you're standing there in the store, which, is also super helpful.
Yeah, 100%. That's cool. I haven't heard of Skin Deep, so thank you for that one also. And just going back to what we were talking about kind of at the beginning of talking about hormones, you were talking about how, a lot of people recognize that they have hormonal imbalances because they get something that shows up like acne, or maybe it's weight gain or bloating, or noticing that, their body kind of changes size throughout their cycle. And that's the thing that triggers them to know that something's going on. But I'd be curious to know kind of your thoughts around, I guess, like heavy periods, painful periods. Are those something that we should be having? Should we be looking at how we can do more balancing with our hormones if we are experiencing a lot of period pain? And if so, where do we start with that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And that's another one that's so common to have period pain or really heavy periods. And I don't think it's normal. I think it's really common. And I think that a lot of women are going to have some cramping. I mean, when you look at what cramping is, it's the little smooth muscles around the arterioles in your uterus clamping that off. And that's important, right? Because that's stopping the flow of blood. That's a way that you're not going to bleed to death. And so it's good to have that blood flow stop. So a little bit of cramping is pretty normal, but people that are suffering from really severe period pain, I think, is not normal. And the things that I would look at for that is, again, like when I take a history, I want to know all about your digestion and what you're eating and how's your sleep and how's your stress level and are you consuming a lot of caffeine. And coffee and caffeine is surprisingly one of the worst things you can possibly do for your hormones. And I know a lot of people are super addicted to it or really love it, but that's one of the first things I have people clean up. Certainly looking at what their environment is like. Do they have a lot of chemicals in their world? What their food is like? Could they possibly have a food sensitivity or something that's mucking up the works in the hormones? I see a lot of women with PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and also infertility. And the basics are critical for those things. What you're eating, how your digestion is, what your lifestyle is like, how much caffeine are you consuming, how much alcohol are you consuming. Those things are really, really important. And I think they get poo-pooed in Western medicine for being like, oh, that's just nutrition and, you need to take this drug. But I really think that those are the powerhouses. Those are the things that are going to make the biggest difference. There's also some wonderful herbs that I use for women that have some of those things going on that can make an enormous difference. Vitex or Chase Tree is one of the ones I probably use the most in my practice. Other things like maybe inositol, which is a supplement, can be very helpful. Those are the basic things, but I think that getting the nutrition right really makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it can be hard. Like I remember reading, similar to what you just said, like if you have hormonal imbalances and you want to kind of, fix this, you need to stop drinking coffee. And I was like, no, how do I do that? It's so hard. And I definitely, this was kind of 3 years ago that I really dove into this, and I cut myself off coffee pretty, I guess, just cold turkey. I wasn't drinking that much before because my body is pretty sensitive to coffee. And I was pretty, I think, aware that my body wasn't reacting well to coffee. So once I was just like, okay, you can deal without the flavor of coffee, you'll be fine. And then as I felt like I was starting to heal a little bit more, I went more to like, okay, you can have a latte on the weekends and stuff like that. And I've kind of added like some, mushroom coffees and stuff back occasionally if I'm craving that, and still the occasional latte. But it's hard. I mean, if that's part of your regular rhythm, it's really hard to just cut it out. But from my experience, like it did make a lot of difference. And I still notice, especially as I head into, my luteal phase and then into menstruation, I notice the difference in the way that I feel if I consume coffee, particularly in those two phases. Like my body it just seems to overwhelm my body in a
Mm-hmm.
sort of strange way.
Mm-hmm. I love that you've had that experience because I really think it's one of the hardest things I ask people to do, like the look on their faces. And then I always just say, try it for a month. You'll be able to tell a difference if it's not the right thing for you. And sometimes that feels a little less overwhelming. But a lot of people lean on coffee because they want this energy and it's hard on your adrenals. And just get a really good night's sleep. Work on your sleep more rather than like cranking yourself up in the morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think too, it's kind of a little bit like cyclical in some ways, because I found, and especially this was bad many years ago, I guess when I first went off birth control, because I was working in corporate. So not only did I have a coffee in the morning, I usually had a coffee like after lunch during that afternoon slump when my body was trying to digest, but I needed to keep working. And that really throws off your sleep. Like I actually just yesterday I had a latte, a little later in the day than I definitely should have. And I noticed the impact of it on my sleep. And so I found when I don't drink coffee, I like feel more tired at night and I sleep a lot better. And it kind of just becomes this, you don't really need coffee because you're sleeping better and the caffeine's not impacting your sleep as much.
Right. And then if you want to have it on the weekends, like what you're doing, like have it for fun and enjoy it. But when it gets to be that daily habit, it can be pretty hard on your body. It's amazing to me how much coffee people drink. It really is pretty stunning.
Yeah, I have a friend, he did a 30-day no coffee challenge, I think it was, and he just kind of went cold turkey and he was drinking, I think like 13 cups of coffee a day.
Oh my gosh.
So he had an actual like he had kind of like a come down, like the way that drug addicts do when they go into rehab and stuff, like major headaches, he was sweating, he was shaky. It was crazy to hear, and he was very determined to go through that process to kind of wean himself off coffee. And now as from that he doesn't drink as much coffee anymore, but it's just insane. Like I don't even know how you're sleeping when you're drinking that much coffee. Like I think your body must just be sort of in this like state of adrenaline all the time.
Right, right. And your stomach, I mean, you're going to be depleting your body of nutrients because it's such a diuretic. And I remember so clearly, relatively early in practice, a woman came in who basically, she was a realtor, so she's in her car a lot, and she just had coffee with her all day long. And she had terrible acid reflux, and she tried all these medications, and nothing was working. And I was like, well, you really need to cut the coffee. And she was just like, oh, I can't. I'm driving around all day. I have to have my coffee. I was just like, well, it's not going to add up for you, have a different beverage in your car. But yeah, it's just so amazing how, like you say, people are just so, they don't even realize how much they're suffering just because of that one beverage. The coffee industry is going to come down on us for this, but
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to get any coffee companies wanting to sponsor my show.
yeah, me either.
They're going to leave me a 1-star review. That's okay. I'm fine with it. And I mean, I do love coffee. It's no hate on coffee. I wish that coffee made me feel good, but
Right,
it
right.
definitely
And
works
coffee,
better for me to have it once a week.
yeah, coffee actually does have some health benefits, like just to be a little bit balanced in that. Like there's great antioxidants in coffee and resveratrol, but I think that for most people that outweighs, you can get some really good antioxidants from blueberries too. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I think too, like, your example of the real estate agent, and this is something I certainly experienced when I worked in corporate. I think, some jobs are very high demands. And if you're going all the time, there's a lot of people that are sustaining off coffee. And I think that makes it even worse. Like, I think, for at least me personally, there's a difference between me having breakfast and then going out and having, a latte or something like that, or treating myself to a coffee for a road trip versus if I wake up and I'm too rushed to have breakfast and all I do is drink coffee all day because it's curbing my appetite. And then I go to eat later in the day and I'm so wired and my stomach's so thrown off from it. To me, there's just like such a difference in how we can, I guess, like use it in our lives and how it can kind of impact us in that way.
hmm Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that when I talk to patients, I try to talk to them about looking at these things that they're consuming, about what's actually going to feed your cells. Every cell of your body has to live, has to grow, has to function off what you put in your mouth. So if you're putting in your mouth, and a lot of people are going to someplace, to a coffee shop, and getting something that's also now loaded with sugar, maybe loaded with dairy products too. So there's a lot of other things that are going into the coffee. And if that's what you're letting, it's like putting donuts in your gas tank. Like you wouldn't throw that into your car and expect your car to run properly. You wouldn't, you have to appreciate that this is the fuel for your cells. So making it something that counts is, it's not that hard to do. I appreciate that it is hard for some people when they're in that habit, but once you get out of the habit, you feel so much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yeah, and I definitely like went through a phase in my early 20s where I didn't have the best eating habits, and I thought a lot about, calories in, calories out. So if I ate something like a donut or chips or pizza, then I was like, "Oh, well that's all the calories I can eat. So I'm not going to eat anything else." And I very much switched my mindset to be like, sure, I can have the occasional donut or, a bowl of chips or, have pizza, but I'm also going to eat, make myself a nice nourishing smoothie or have a soup earlier in the day or make a salad with it or something like that. And I'm not going to worry about how many calories there are because I'm choosing to eat it. I'm still going to eat the things that are very nourishing because I know my body needs that in order for me to feel good and feel energized.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's a great way to look at it. I don't think anybody needs to live completely angelically and be perfect all the time, but you've got to keep that balance. So if you're planning on pizza that night, have a salad for lunch, or like you said, a smoothie is great. Or one of the tricks that we do is we try to eat a bunch of broccoli first. Like if we're gonna have pizza, let's sit down and eat the broccoli first, so that maybe we won't eat the whole thing. Be sort of full.
You know what's so funny about that is, so I'm up in Canada. We have Tim Hortons. It's like our I guess equivalent to Baskin Robbins, I think. And I used to get to go with my family when I was little, like once a week or something like that. And you could get these little like meal deals. So you'd get this little sandwich and you get a donut and, like a drink of some sort, whatever it was, like a coffee. Was young, so I usually got like a soda or something like that. And I used to always eat my donut first so that I didn't get too full from my donut. And I feel like my parents were like, "What have we taught you? This is not how you eat properly." But I was like, "Well, I don't want to eat the sandwich first and then like get too full for the donut. Like the donut is why I'm here."
Precisely.
I'm just like, oh man, okay. Need to like make some changes with that. So I definitely approach it the way you said now. And I really think about like, okay, want to make sure that I've got, space for both of these things if I want to eat it, but I'm not going to just eat the donut. I'm going to eat the other stuff first. And then if the donut still feels good, then, then I'll eat the donut.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. I love everything that you've shared here. I'm curious for people who are listening if they're kind of interested in the more holistic approach to health and are really kind of interested in maybe working with a naturopath. How can naturopathic medicine support people's healing? And then also, what does it kind of look like working with a naturopath? Like, is it very similar to working with a doctor or kind of, just for people who have never done it before, what can they kind of expect out of that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think it's pretty different than working with a conventional MD. I think there are some wonderful medical doctors. I'm not trying to denigrate them at all, but I think that the experience from what my patients tell me is different in that I spend a lot of time with my patients trying to figure out underlying cause and talking with them and learning about them. And so rather than feeling like, okay, here's my diabetic patient, it's like, no, here's this woman who has this complicated, complex life, and we have to figure out how we can help support her and keep her healthy and manage her blood sugar. And so, just as an example, diabetes, where if you went to your medical doctor, you would be put on a couple of different drugs probably. You might be cautioned about diet too. I mean, that's one that they do talk about, carbohydrates and things like that. But I would really talk a lot about nutrition, and I would make sure that all of her nutrients are in balance and that she's got enough chromium on board. And there's some really wonderful supplements that can help a lot with blood sugar. I think it's also really important to have good follow-up with people. And so one of the things that's really important to me is just building those relationships and knowing what's going on with my patients and trying to get to as many different underlying causes of things as we can to really keep their health as balanced and optimal as possible. So my initial visit with patients is 90 minutes, and we sometimes do some different types of testing, but then follow-up visits are usually about 45, and just try to really stay in close touch with them and be available, especially when people are going through things or changing things or addressing things. My goal with people is that they get better and don't really need me all the time. But until that happens, until we have things really balanced, I really try to be in touch with them and have regular follow-up visits with them so we can address any of the things that are going on. It's like what you were saying with the coffee. when you have to try to adjust your life in some way, whether it's giving up coffee or wheat or whatever, it's an adjustment. And so you need a little bit of support. So I really try to provide that support to patients and help them heal the leaky gut or have hormonal balancing, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I really love that. That was definitely my experience working with a naturopathic doctor as well, is just feeling like supported, I guess, for the longer term. And again, it's no fault against a general practitioner, a medical doctor. They absolutely serve our community in a different way and serve our society in a different way. And I think that there's a time and a place for that. But for me and what I've gone through with my digestion and my hormonal challenges and imbalances, I've definitely found, I'm so grateful for my naturopath. Like, I think that she really helped me heal in so many ways. And I think for anyone listening, if you're experiencing anything like that, digestion, hormones, anything that feels off and, it doesn't feel like a doctor can kind of fix it through a prescription or a blood test or something, I think going and seeing a naturopath is a really amazing way to see if you can figure out what's going on.
I think so too. And I also feel like a lot of people, if they want to go through their life and health is important to them, and I think health is the absolutely most important thing that there is, because if you don't have good health, then you don't really have anything. I think that having a naturopath on your team, even if you don't have anything serious going on, but having a naturopath on your team really can be super helpful in terms of prevention and longevity and just avoiding some of the pitfalls that a lot of people end up with. Because if you don't go see somebody till you're 50 and then you have all these problems, then there's all of this other sort of back work that needs to be done. So I think the sooner that you can have a naturopathic doctor on your team, the better off you're going to be.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And with that in mind, I'm curious if people are interested in learning more about you, maybe working with you, where can they go to find you?
So my website is basically my last name, Dr. Dr. And then the last name is Thyr, spelled Thyr. So drthyr.com. The name of my practice is Willowbend Natural Medicine. So that will also funnel you to find me. And that's probably the easiest way. And, I'm always happy to talk to people, briefly if they need to just ask some questions to see if it's a good fit too. Sometimes, they want to just get some basic, not actually medical advice, but just get some questions answered, to make sure that it's going to be a good fit for us to work together.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation today. This has just been really inspiring, and I've loved talking with you and just learning a little bit more from you. So thank you for taking the time to chat with me.
Amanda, it's really totally been my honor and pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Matcha Mornings. To find links mentioned in this episode, show notes, photos, and more, head on over to wanderbarn.com/podcast/matcha-mornings. To be the first to know about brand new episodes of Matcha Mornings, subscribe on your podcast app. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, please leave a review or send me an email at wanderbarn@gmail.com with the subject line Matcha Mornings. To follow along with me, Amanda Kingsmith, you can find me on Instagram at Amanda Kingsmith to learn more about other fun projects I'm working on. To find more great podcasts like this one on topics such as travel, the business of yoga, cryptocurrency, and more, head on over to wanderbarn.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.